For joining us tonight, and welcome to the Northwest Consumer Law Center webinar series, How to Survive the Financial Effects of COVID-19. Today's webinar is how to manage your private student loans during COVID-19. My name is Amanda Martin, and I'm the Executive Director at the Northwest Consumer Law Center. At Northwest Consumer Law Center, we envision a world where there's justice for all, regardless of income. Our mission is to advance economic justice. If you have questions during the presentation, please enter those in the chat box on your right. I will be answering questions at the end of the presentation. The session is being recorded and will be available on our website by tomorrow afternoon. Attending this webinar does not create an attorney-client relationship. This presentation provides legal information and is not a substitute for individualized legal advice. If you're seeking legal advice, we recommend that you contact Northwest Consumer Law Center at the end of this webinar. Information on how to apply for our services will be posted at the end of the presentation. And with that, let's get started. Today, we're going to start by talking about the student loan crisis. If you're struggling with repaying your student loans, you're not alone. We'll be talking about how many people are actually affected by this crisis. We'll then talk about the difference between federal and private student loans and how to tell what type of loans you have. Then we'll get into the meat of our presentation. What options do you have if you're struggling with private student loans? And we'll talk about the new options that are available due to COVID-19. From there, we'll talk about best practices for dealing with your student loan servicer. And then we'll talk about what to do if you're being sued on your student loans and how student loans are dealt with in bankruptcy. So America is in a student loan crisis. There's over $1.7 trillion in student loan debt in America. And that leads us to, why is there a crisis? And that's because there's only 55% of all student loans that are in repayment. The other 45% are in deferral, forbearance, or in default. An estimated 1 million people default on their student loans every year. For reference, there's only 747,000 people living in the city of Seattle. So imagine that every person in the city of Seattle defaulted on their student loans every year, and then add another 250,000 people to that. So why is there a student loan crisis? Well, that could be a whole webinar in itself. The rising cost of education and the lack of financial counseling available add to that. We're also expecting to see an increase in private student loans in the future. As federal loans, student loans are beginning to limit the amount of loans that they're offering to students. Some studies estimate that if there aren't any changes in 10 years, there will be more private student loan debt than federal student loan debt. You also might have heard that Congress is considering forgiving or canceling some or all student loan debt, but as of the day of this webinar, that has not happened. So what we're going to talk today is how to strategize to put yourself in the best position for dealing with your private student loans. So the first question that you need to ask is what type of student loans you have. Today's presentation is primarily going to deal with options for private student loans, but it's important that we start by defining the difference because what type of loan you have determines what options are available to you. So federal student loans. The majority of student loan debt is federal government loans. Since 2015, most of these loans are made directly by the federal government, and this is known as the direct loan program. There are many older loans out there that were made by private lenders, but guaranteed by the federal government. The good thing about federal government loans is that there are many different programs available if you're struggling to make your payments, such as income-based repayment, and even cancellation programs in some limited circumstances. The bad news is that the federal government has extraordinary powers to collect on you if you default on your federal student loans. For example, they can take away part or all of your tax refund, and if you get federal benefits, there can be an offset. Now, let's talk about private student loans. Private student loans are made by banks or other financial institutions without any direct financial backing from the federal government. These are also sometimes called alternative loans on your financial aid award letter or private label loans. Because private loans are not subsidized by the federal government, they are not regulated as much. Advocates like to say that private student loans are the Wild West. That's because they do not have to offer income-based repayment and loan cancellation like the federal student loan programs do. So if you're a student, I highly recommend that you look into your options for federal student loans before looking at private student loans. Private student loans must typically sue you before they can take money out of your bank account or garnish your wages. They don't have the same powers as the federal government does to offset your tax refund or your federal benefits. There are time limits on how long a private student loan can try and collect from you. It depends on what state you live in, and it also depends on what's in your loan contract. So how can you figure out what type of loan you have? I'm going to enter in the chat box right now a link that if you are having questions about what type of student loan you have, you can go to. It's by studentloanborrowerassistance.org. It's a program started by the National Consumer Law Center, and it has a lot of great information on there for your student loans. On that link that I sent, they're going to walk you through step-by-step of how to get your information for your federal student loans. We know that tracking down all the information for your student loans can be very difficult. And why is that? That's because most loans that you get, both federal and private, are typically given by quarter or semester. So if you're in school for 4 years and you take out student loans every year, you likely have several different loans. And you can take out federal and private loans at the same time. So you can see how these things can add up and get confusing after you graduate, trying to figure out where your student loans are and what type that you have. But you have to know what type of loan you have in order to understand your options. For federal student loans, you can go to the National Student Loan Data System, which is in the link that I sent, to find out what type of federal loans that you have. There's no similar database for private student loans. You have to contact your lenders or your loan holders to get more information about your private loans. One tip that I have, if you're not sure who's servicing your loan, is looking at your credit report. They don't always show up on your credit report because creditors are not required to report any type of loan or debt on your credit report. There's also the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which has a private student loan ombudsman and an online assistant tool. And the Department of Education also has some information about the difference between private and federal loans. So after you determine that you have private student loans, you need to think about what your options are. First, we're just going to talk about the regular options that are normally available before diving into the special programs that they have because of COVID-19. Every private student loan servicer varies. Not all of them offer all the options we're about to talk about. So if you're interested in any of these options or wondering what's available to you, we recommend that you talk to an attorney or a student loan advocate and then contact your servicer directly to see what options are available. So first, talking about deferment. Deferment typically pushes out payments of the student loans. The majority of student loans, both federal and private, have some type of deferment while you're in school. You don't have to make payments. Many private student loan servicers and all the federal student loans offer a deferment after you graduate, usually 3 to 6 months, so that way you can find a job before you start making repayments. Or some student loan servicers offer a deferment while you're unemployed, but they do not have to offer a deferment for private student loans. So again, if this is an option that you're considering, make sure you reach out to your student loan servicer to see if it is an option. Next, we're going to talk about repayment options for private student loans. Typically, your loan will require you to make a monthly payment over a term. They're usually about 10 years. Some private student loan servicers offer multiple payment options where you can pay less over a longer period or pay more over a shorter period. Some even offer income-based repayment, very similar to the federal student loan programs. But here's the thing, they do not have to offer those programs. You should, again, check with your student loan servicer to see if they have anything that's similar. And if they do, figure out what the terms of that are. Next, we're going to talk about consolidation. So if you have student loans, chances are you probably get something in the mail at least once a week advertising refinance or consolidation of your student loans. Consolidation is basically like a refinance. You're taking all the different student loans you have and putting it into one payment. You cannot consolidate private student loans with federal consolidation programs. It's also very dangerous to consolidate federal student loans into a private consolidation loan. If you do that, you are losing all of your rights under the federal programs to have income-based repayment and to have cancellation of your loans in certain circumstances. So we highly recommend in most cases that you don't refinance or consolidate your federal student loans into private student loans. If you have private student loans that you're thinking about consolidating or refinancing, that could be a good option for you. If you want a single monthly payment, it makes it much easier to keep track of. You also might be able to get a better deal, a better interest rate if your credit score is higher now than when you took out the loans. But if you're considering any type of consolidation of just private student loans, you should still speak with a financial counselor or a student loan advocate. And you also want to read whatever type of consolidation offers you receive very closely to make sure that you understand all the terms before you accept. Next, we're going to talk about forbearance. People are talking about forbearances now because of COVID-19 and the financial struggles that people are facing. Forbearance is typically a period of time where you don't have to make payments. It can be anywhere from 3 to 12 months typically. At the end of the forbearance period, in most situations, you're going to have to pay back the missed payments and become current. So if you requested a 3-month forbearance in March and missed your March, April, and May payments, and that forbearance ends in June, you're going to have to pay March, April, May, and June all at once in order to become current and avoid default on your student loans. Again, not all private student loan servicers offer a forbearance period. You need to check in with them if they do, if that's something that you're interested in. So our next question, is there any special relief for those financially struggling due to COVID-19? So we know that the Federal CARES Act provided some much needed relief for federal student loans, including suspending monthly payments for a period of time and suspending interest. However, the CARES Act left out millions of people who struggle with private student loans. Luckily, Washington State partnered with a few other states, and our Department of Financial Institutions announced last month that they secured relief with many private student loan servicers to expand on some of the protections given by the federal government for federal student loans. So there are only certain student loan servicers who are participating in this program. There's a list of them there. It's Aspire Resources, College Ave, Student Loan Servicing, Earnest Operations, Ed Financial, Kentucky Higher Education Student Loan Corporation, Linky Technologies, MOHELA, Navient, Nelnet, SoFi, Tuition Options, United Guarantee Services, Upstart Network, Utah Higher Education Assistance Authority, and Vermont Student Assistance Corporation. So those are the servicers who are participating in this special program with Washington State borrowers. What relief is available? So DFI is saying that these servicers will provide a minimum of 90 days of forbearance, that they will waive late payment fees during this time, that they will ensure no borrower is subject to negative credit reporting. So if you get a forbearance, based off what DFI is saying, that should not be reported negatively on your credit report. If you are in default, they're ceasing debt collection lawsuits for a period of 90 days. And they're also working to enroll borrowers in other programs like income-based repayment. You're going to notice that these sound pretty similar to the options that we talked about before. But again, private student loan servicers do not have to offer any of these options. By agreeing to do so with Washington State, they're being more transparent about what options are available. So if you're struggling with private student loans, again, I encourage you to reach out to an attorney or a student loan advocate for individual advice. And I'm going to link the DFI press release to the chat group. So that way, if you're interested in learning more, you can go straight to the source. So let's talk about best practices for dealing with your student loan servicer. These practices should really apply at any time. Whenever you're dealing with any type of student loan, you're going to want to make sure that you keep documentation and you keep track of what's going on. But we're going to talk about this specifically for the COVID-19 financial relief. These programs are all very new and they're all being developed. So your student loan servicer website might not have all the up-to-date information. You should call in if you're interested in these options. If they do have something on their website, and you're relying on that information, I recommend you screenshot or print out the website that has that information documented in case there's any disagreement in the future about what options they're actually offering. We also recommend that you always document all communications that you have with your student loan servicer, the who, what, when, where, why, and how. So if after this webinar, you call your student loan servicer, you're going to write down at 7 o'clock that you talked with Sally from Navient about forbearance offers, and she said you could do a 3-month forbearance, and she was automatically putting you in the program. You want to make sure that you keep notes of what these people are telling you. You also want to get any and all agreements you make with them in writing. So again, if you talk with Sally from Navient and she offers you a 3-month forbearance period, you're going to ask her to send you a letter confirming that. And the very least, try and get an email confirming that. It's better to have, an agreement in writing that you're both signing, but if anything, you get an email from them saying they agreed to it, you're having something that documents what your agreement is. I also recommend that folks be patient when they're calling in. A lot of people are financially struggling right now. So if you're calling into your student loan servicer, you should probably expect a long wait time. So call at a time where you have the time to deal with it. I also recommend that when you're calling, ask about all of your options that are available. Sometimes student loan servicers are actually paid more by the people who own your loan to put you in a forbearance or deferment than an income-based repayment. So they're incentivized to only tell you about the forbearance or that deferment. That's wrong, and I believe it's illegal. But in order to ask for yourself, you need to ask about all the options that are available to you for dealing with your student loans. And make sure you're asking detailed questions so that you know the terms of the agreement that you're getting into. You need to know, are they going to report this on your credit? If you're in a forbearance, are they going to report those payments they're allowing you to skip as missed payments? That's going to negatively affect your credit score. You need to know that. You also need to ask, are they going to send you a letter confirming your agreement? You're going to want documentation they're sending you. You also need to ask, do you need to send them any information to qualify for the program? Sometimes you might need to send in your unemployment benefits proof, or you might need to send in a form that they're going to send you. Make sure that you know exactly what you need to do in order to qualify for any of these relief programs. If you're in a forbearance, you need to know when is the forbearance going to start, and you need to know when it's going to end. You also need to know what is going to happen when it ends. Do you have to make up all those missed payments at once? Are they going to offer you some other type of catch-up plan, or are they going to put it at the end of the loan? These are all very important questions that you need to ask. Make sure you get as many details as possible so that way you know what you're getting into. My next tip is to make sure you're documenting all of your payments. Make sure that whatever statements you receive match your records so that way you can ensure that your payments are being applied correctly. Finally, if your private student loan has been sent to a debt collector, a third party who's collecting on a debt of another, you have rights under the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. When you're dealing with debt collectors, they cannot harass you, they cannot tell you things that are untrue. They cannot use unfair or deceptive practices. And we have a whole webinar about your rights when dealing with debt collectors available on our website. And finally, my final tip is don't ignore the problem. If you're struggling with private student loans, reach out to an advocate, reach out to an attorney who's experienced in this area so you can learn about your options. Student loans are typically not discharged in bankruptcy, and they can become a big problem for people. Federal student loans, again, they can take your tax refund. They can even take your federal benefits. Private student loans, they can sue you on and get a judgment. So it's really important that you know what options are available to you because you're not going to know unless you ask. So let's talk about what happens if you default on your private student loans. You can be sent to a collection agency that's going to be reported negatively on your credit report. It's going to negatively impact your credit score, and you can be sued on your private student loans. They cannot offset your tax refund or take your federal benefits like federal student loans can if you default on them. So if you are in default and you get sued on your private student loans, what do? So in Washington State, most lawsuits start with service of a summons and complaint. So somebody knocks on your door and hands you legal paperwork, or you or somebody that you live with. Once you are served, you typically have about 20 days to respond to that lawsuit. If you do not respond, the student loan servicer can get what's called a default judgment against you. Once they have a default judgment, that's when they can try and garnish your bank account or garnish your wages. So it's very important that if you're served with a summons and complaint with legal paperwork for any type of private student loan, you talk to an attorney right away, so that way you could be advised on how to respond. If you don't respond, they are automatically going to get a default judgment if you don't respond on time. So make sure you keep track of any deadlines with that. I've also heard about people being served with a lawsuit for a student loan company that they haven't heard of before, such as National Collegiate Student Loan Trust or SLM Trust. These people have had student loans, but they never heard of these companies before, and they think it's a scam. Anytime you're served with any type of legal paperwork, you should definitely talk to an attorney about it to see whether it is a scam or not. But there are many cases where the loan is sold to a different party, or you're being sued by the trust that holds it, not the last student loan servicer that you heard from. So again, talk to an attorney if you're served with paperwork. There are a lot of legal aid resources out there. Northwest Justice Project, Washington Law Help has a lot of information on their website about how to respond to any type of debt collection complaint. And then, of course, Northwest Consumer Law Center. And we'll talk about how to get in touch with us at the end of this presentation. So are private student loans dischargeable in bankruptcy? So federal and private student loans are treated the same in a bankruptcy case, and they're not automatically discharged if you file for bankruptcy. Federal and private's treated the same. In order for federal or private student loans to be discharged in bankruptcy, you have to file what's called an adversary proceeding in the bankruptcy. It's essentially a separate lawsuit within that bankruptcy case to discharge your student loans. In order to do that, you have to meet what's called the undue hardship test. In Washington State, that's what the test is. Undue hardship means something different from what you and I think of. It's a legal standard that involves many different factors. It's not impossible to discharge student loan debt in bankruptcy, but it can be difficult. So if you're considering that option, you definitely need to talk with an experienced bankruptcy attorney. And next, what about my federal student loans? So today, this webinar was focusing specifically on private student loans. We have a webinar that we did a couple weeks ago that focuses on federal student loans. That's available on our website now. You can watch it. Federal student loans, most of them are in a suspension period for 6 months until September. Most federal student loans, interest should not be accruing on. So the CARES Act really provided some great relief for federal student loans. And now we're going to go ahead and open it up for questions. So if you have any questions, please enter those in the chat box on your right. All right. So our first question tonight is, will you get a stimulus check if you're in default on your federal student loans? And the answer is yes. The IRS has said that they are not offsetting stimulus checks for if you're in default on federal student loans, or even if you owe taxes. So the good news is that if you have federal student loans and you're in default, you should receive the full amount of the stimulus check that you're entitled to. And our next question is, can I consolidate my private and federal student loans together? You can, but we highly recommend against it in most cases. That's because if you consolidate your federal loans into any type of private student loan, you are losing all the rights. You're losing, if you work in public interest, you're losing that public service loan forgiveness. You're losing income-based repayment options. You're losing cancellation if you have a total disability. So it's really eliminating a lot of your rights that you have if you keep the federal student loans. There are consolidation programs for federal student loans. And if that's something that you're interested in, I recommend that you look at studentloanborrowerassistance.org. There's a lot of great resources on there about both federal and private student loans. And I don't see that we have any more questions. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about the next session in our Northwest Consumer Law Center webinar series. We are hosting free webinars every Wednesday at 6 p.m. We're going to be talking all the different COVID-19 consumer-related topics that are coming up. We know that Congress is considering more COVID-19 financial relief. So we're going to be scheduling those webinars in the future based off the topics that come out of that. Next week, we're going to be talking about mortgage forbearances. 4 million Americans are already in a mortgage forbearance due to COVID-19. If you're considering a mortgage forbearance or you're already in one, make sure that you join us for this session. At Northwest Consumer Law Center, we've been helping people with mortgage forbearances and other loss mitigation options like loan modification since the Great Recession. We were founded in 2013, and we've learned a lot of lessons about loss mitigation and mortgage forbearances during that time. And we're going to be sharing that with you next Wednesday, May 27th at 6 p.m. You can sign up online on our website, nwclc.org/COVID-19. And to get in touch with us, if you're seeking help with a consumer legal issue, you're welcome to contact us to apply for our services. We're able to provide help for those of low and moderate incomes in Washington State. You can apply online at nwclc.org/get-help or by phone at 206-805-1722. If you have questions about the presentation, you're more than welcome to contact us at email, admin@nwclc.org. Again, if you're looking for additional resources, we have recordings of all the prior sessions of this webinar series available online at nwclc.org/COVID-19. There are already great sessions on mortgages, foreclosure, debt collection, federal student loans, and bankruptcy available for you to watch now. You can support the work we do by making a donation online at nwclc.org. Make sure you follow us on our Facebook page to stay up to date on all the resources that we're putting out. We appreciate your support and thank you for joining us tonight. Take care.